Hello everybody, my name is Grant Dominic. I will be presenting When the Hero is Not Heroic, Music in the Batman. Thanks for bearing with me as we figured all of that stuff out. Okay, The Batman is a 2022 film directed by Matt Reeves and starring Robert Pattinson in the titular role. It follows Batman at an early point in his journey, solving like a dark mystery and growing from someone who is driven entirely by vengeance to someone who is a symbol for hope. It's a really great movie, I highly recommend it. But for this presentation, I'm going to be focusing mainly on the fantastic original score composed by Michael Giacchino. Rather unusually in his score, he chooses to not write a superheroic film for the superhero Batman. Instead, he chooses to reflect Batman's struggle with vengeance in his theme by writing a dark, never-ending theme full of references to evil and death, a funeral march in place of a heroic theme. So let's take a look at this theme. I've written it out here for you. It's not very complicated. So let's take a listen. We will if it came through my laptop. So okay. There we go. That's it. That's the whole thing. Just that repeated over and over again, just those two chords, honestly, mostly just those two notes. Not very much seems to be going on here, but I promise there's a lot once we really get into it. I want to draw your attention to the chords here. Right here we have a B flat minor and G flat major, the alternation there, and the Roman numerals for those are a minor 1 and a major flat 6. Remember those, they will be important. So let's take a look at a couple of really famous works that this theme really strongly resembles. Perhaps the most famous piece of funeral music ever is Chopin's Second Piano Sonata, which is most often called his funeral march. I'll play an excerpt of it here, so try to listen for like the underlying chords. You hear it, especially in the last two beats of the melody, you can hear that bum, 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 bum. The alternation of major third, do, re, is the exact same thing as the Batman. In fact, eagle-eyed ones of you may have already noticed, this is actually even in the exact same key. Same B flat minor to G flat major, 1 and flat 6. But there's another piece of music that this also evokes, arguably one of the most famous pieces of film music ever composed, the Imperial March. Kind of crazy for a superheroes theme to reference the theme of maybe the most famous villain of all time, but both the characters of Darth Vader and Batman are shaped really strongly by death, and as I'll get into later, a lot of this theme references antagonism. Let's take a listen. So if you simplify it a little bit, you can hear that bum, 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 bum. It's the same alternation. The only slight difference here is where the Batman's theme has a minor 1 and major flat 6. We have minor 1 and minor flat 6. Slight difference in terms of the chords themselves, but the actual melodic line there is exactly the same, and it really strongly evokes the Imperial March, just because of by the nature of being a piece of film music. So, the 1 and flat 6 alternation is the main driving force of this theme. There's really not much else going on, to be honest. So let's take a look at this particular chord progression, or alternation more accurately, and see what it's doing. Two film theorists, Scott Murphy and our very own Dr. Heine, have established typical narrative associations with chord relationships. In Murphy's analysis, relationships are determined by chord quality and the interval between them measured in half steps. In Murphy's, he's going to count up, so there's 8 half steps in between. We're doing minor to major or minor to minor for the imperial version. And he associates that relationship with antagonism. Again, kind of crazy for a superheroes theme. In Dr. Heine's analysis, he measures it the other direction, so down the major third, 4 half steps, and calls it the Vader motion, which again associated with antagonism, being a villain. Pretty negative connotations on both ends, but this really strongly plays into the Batman story as being consumed by vengeance is definitely more of an antagonistic trait. So looking back at the 1-flat-6 progression again, this is kind of an unusual motion, especially isolated like this in music with no other chords around it. Most Western music, if you simplify it down to oblivion, is a fight between tonic and dominant 1-5. Obviously, that's not really what we have going on here. Music theorist James Bueller writes in Star Wars Music and Myth about this exact issue in the Imperial March. He writes that the flat 6 chord effectively swallows up the dominant in the function, taking its place and function. However, like I mentioned before, that's where the Imperial March has a minor flat 6, and here's where the difference is. The minor flat 6 has what is the enharmonic equivalence of the leading tone within the minor flat 6 chord, which still gives us a bit of motion, still gives us more of an alternation between those and sounds more like a dominant. However, here with a major flat 6, we don't have that leading tone and harmonic equivalence. We just have do again. So this gives us much more of a feeling of going nowhere, which we'll continue on into one of the next points. So let's zoom out a little bit from the chord progression itself and look at how this is actually performed in the movie. Even the instruments that Giacchino uses to carry this melody really evoke the funeral sound. The piano, which is what you heard in the example I played for you, is what normally carries the theme in the movie. And this, of course, only further evokes the Chopin's Funeral March. I mean, it's the exact same chord progression, the exact same key, and even in the exact same instrument. So it really gives us that Chopin funeral sound. The timpani is another instrument that often carries the lead. And you know, timpani is kind of an unusual melodic choice, so it really specifically calls to mind things like Mahler's First Symphony, where it has an alternation between the 1 and the 5. 1 in flat 6, again, like Bueller wrote, is almost the same thing. It gives a slightly different thing from do sol to do re. And in the third movement of Mahler's First Symphony, where that timpani thing is happening, is the funeral march movement. So once again, we're getting funeral references there. Tubular bells, bell tones are near constant throughout the theme. You can hear them in the background, bum, 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 really emphasizing that 1-flat-6 alternation. And just on their own, they really call to mind like church bells that you would hear at a funeral. But more specifically, they call to mind Cantus in Memoriam Benjamin Britten, which is an elegy written to honor the great composer, which also uses tubular bells in a very similar way. So lastly, I'd like to zoom out even more and look at the form of this theme. You know, if there can be such a thing with such a simple melody there. Film music theorist Mark Richards has established several different forms and theme types for analyzing film music, and he has one that fits this really well. The motto. A motto theme consists of a single motive repeated to oblivion and not actually developing anywhere, which is exactly what we have. This absolutely plays even stronger into the themes of vengeance, which is just a never-ending struggle. You're not getting anywhere with vengeance. So the theme itself becomes the dark journey that doesn't go anywhere, that is vengeance. So, we have constant references to funerals and death in the orchestration and the melody, a chord progression that is associated closely with antagonism, and a form and feel of going nowhere. All of that together, we get a really dark, sad funeral march where we should have a heroic theme. But this really effectively reflects the Batman struggle in the motion of the film with vengeance and eventually becoming a symbol of hope towards the end of the film. So why does any of this matter? Film music analysis is only recently getting any sort of respect and attention from academia as a whole, and I think it should only continue to do so. Film music has really fantastic, deep, impactful music that really deserves to be looked at. It's also rather unique in the field with how deeply tied it is to storytelling. I think that music and storytelling both are really important things, important parts of the human experience. So studying them is really, can only be a good thing. But personally, when I'm looking at this, I do so from the perspective of a teacher. This semester, I'm actually doing student teaching, and have only gained more perspective on how hard we as teachers have to work to find ways to connect to students and make material interesting to them. In fact, right after this presentation, I'm going back to Carl Albert High School to teach a class of AP Music Theory, which has really showed me how much you have to work to make music theory interesting to teenagers. And I feel like the best way of doing that is finding ways to connect the material to things that they're interested in. Who isn't interested in Batman? If you can find music theory examples and ideas in things like the Batman, then you can connect to students in an even greater way. And I think that is exactly what we should be doing as teachers. So again, thank you so much. Sorry for all of the stuff at the beginning. Questions are welcome. And here are my words.
Are you familiar with the previous iterations of the Batman theme, like the Adam West Batman or Christopher Nolan's? How do you think that might compare to those previous versions?
I think they were trying to do something very different, especially the Adam West Batman is 1960s, very camp television. They're it was way more into the superhero themes. Nolan is not quite villain, but it is it's certainly darker than that. This is something different entirely, especially with the structure of just a single measure being repeated over and over again. I think is a really different thing that hasn't been done with the Batman theme before. Is that what you're getting at? Anything else? All right, thank you so much, guys. I really enjoyed it.